Commander Zethkara stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched another one of his ships die. The explosion lit up the dark space around them with bright orange fire. Metal pieces scattered in all directions like deadly rain. He counted the losses in his head. 12 ships gone in the last hour. 12 crews that would never see their homeworlds again. His 4 eyes focused on the enemy fleet ahead. The hive ships looked like giant insects made of dark metal and pulsing flesh. They moved through space with an awful grace, their bioweapons, firing streams of acid and plasma at anything that moved. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in spines and tendrils that reached out like hungry fingers. The bridge shook as another blast hit their shields. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. Around him, his crew worked frantically to keep their ship alive. The Nexari communications officer sang in musical tones to coordinate with other ships. Her crystal body glowed with stress patterns. The ethereal engineer floated between control panels, his gas-like form moving through the ship's systems to repair damage from the inside. Lieutenant Vorthak, a reptilian warrior from the desert world of Kethmar, looked up from his tactical display. His scaled face showed the same hopeless expression that had become common among the Alliance forces. "Sir, we have lost the cruiser Dancing Star. The Granite People ship Mountain's Heart is badly damaged and requesting permission to retreat." Zethkara felt his mandibles click together in frustration. The Alliance of Peaceful Worlds had been formed 300 years ago, when 7 different species decided to work together instead of fighting each other. They had built beautiful cities, shared knowledge, and created art that spanned the galaxy. They had solved problems with talking and thinking. They had made trade agreements and scientific partnerships. They had never needed to fight a real war. Now they were dying because of it. The Hive Fleet had appeared 3 days ago at the edge of their star system. No warning, no demands, no attempts to communicate. They had simply started destroying everything in their path. The bioships moved like a plague of locusts, consuming everything they touched. They ate metal, absorbed energy, and turned living beings into more of themselves. "How many ships do we have left?" Zethkara asked, though he already knew the answer. "Would be bad? 42 combat vessels, sir. Down from 96 when we started." Vorthak's voice was steady, but his tail twitched with anxiety. "The enemy still has over 300 ships, and they keep growing stronger. Every ship they destroy, every world they consume, they use the materials to build more of themselves." Zethkara looked at the tactical display that showed the battle. Red dots marked enemy positions. Blue dots marked his own forces. The blue dots were scattered and few. The red dots filled the screen like a spreading infection. In the 3 days since the fighting began, the Hive had already consumed 2 mining colonies and a research station. Millions of beings had died, or been taken to feed the growing biofleet. The worst part was how the Hive fought. They were not just powerful. They were smart. Every weapon the Alliance used, the Hive adapted to it. Every tactic they tried, the enemy learned to counter. It was like fighting an opponent that became better with every exchange of fire. "Sir," the Nexari officer sang in her musical language, "we are receiving a transmission from the research. Vessel Distant Discovery. Captain Nelandra wants to speak with you." The holographic image of Captain Nelandra appeared in the center of the bridge. She was an Aquarian, with blue skin that seemed to flow like water and large eyes that held ancient wisdom. Her species had been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years, always seeking knowledge and understanding. If anyone could find a solution to their problem, it would be her. "Commander Zethkara," she said, her voice carrying the stress of the past few days, "I have been analyzing the battle data, and I must tell you something important. We cannot win this fight." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of damaged systems. Everyone knew it was true, but hearing it said out loud made it real. "The Hive learns too fast," Nelandra continued. "Every strategy we use, they counter within hours. Every weapon we fire, they develop resistance to it. We are fighting an enemy that becomes stronger every time we engage them. At this rate, we will all be dead or captured within 2 days. Zethkara felt his heart sink. Then what do you suggest, Captain? Do we surrender? Do we run? Neither, Nelendra replied. Her image flickered as another enemy blast hit somewhere in the fleet. I have been studying data from the Outer Rim territories. There is a species there that might be able to help us. They are primitive by our standards, but they have something we lack. What could a primitive species offer us? Asked Lieutenant Vorthak. We have technology they cannot even imagine. We have weapons that can destroy planets. What could they possibly teach us? Nalandra's expression grew thoughtful. They know how to fight wars. Real wars, not the small. Conflicts we have had between alliance members. Not the trade disputes or border disagreements. They fight wars where the goal is to completely destroy the enemy. The idea seemed impossible to Zethkara. The Alliance had always solved problems through cooperation and understanding. Even their worst conflicts had been settled through negotiation and compromise. The idea of fighting to completely destroy an enemy was foreign to their way of thinking. These beings, Nelandra continued, they call themselves humans. They have been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. They have developed tactics and strategies that we have never considered. Most importantly, they think like predators, not prey. Another explosion lit up the space around them. This time it was the supply ship Gentle Current, carrying medical supplies and food for the wounded. The hive ships moved in to consume the wreckage, growing stronger with each victory. Captain, Zethkara said slowly, we are facing an enemy that has consumed 17 worlds. They have technology that adapts to everything we throw at them. They have numbers that make our fleet look like a small patrol. What makes you think these humans could help us? Nelendra was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. There was something in it that Zethkara had never heard before from an Aquarian. It sounded almost like hope mixed with fear. Because, Commander, these humans do not fight to survive, they fight to win. And there is a very big difference between those two things. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Zethkara looked around at his crew. The Nexari officer had stopped singing. The ethereal engineer had paused in his repairs. Even the steady granite people at the weapon controls had turned their rocky faces toward him. Sir, Vorthak said quietly. What are your orders? Zethkara looked at the tactical display one more time. The red dots were moving closer. Soon they would be within range of the planet behind them, home to 3 billion Valerians. His own people. Men, women, and children who had never hurt anyone, who had spent their lives building and creating instead of destroying. He thought about everything the Alliance stood for: peace, cooperation, understanding. All of it would be lost if the Hive won. But maybe, just maybe, it could be saved if they were willing to learn from someone who understood war in a way they never had. Set course for the coordinates Captain Nelendra transmitted, he ordered. We are going to find these humans and ask them to teach us how to fight. As his ship turned away from the battle, Zethkara wondered if they were making the right choice. They were abandoning everything they believed in to seek help from a species that specialized in violence. But as he watched another Alliance ship die in the distance, he realized they had no choice left. The Hive had to be stopped. And if that meant learning to think like predators instead of prey, then that was what they would do, even if it changed them forever. Jake Morrison was having a good day. The sun was warm on his face, the lake was calm, and the fish were biting. He sat in his small boat, watching his fishing line drift in the clear water. This was exactly what he needed after 20 years in. The Marines, no explosions, no gunfire, no orders to follow. Just peace and quiet. He took a sip of his coffee and smiled. Retirement was treating him well. His cabin in the Montana mountains was far from everything. No traffic, no crowds, no problems that needed solving. Just him, the lake, and whatever fish were brave enough to take his bait. That was when the sky broke open. Jake looked up and saw something that made him question his sanity. A hole had appeared in the blue sky above the lake. Not a cloud or a storm, but an actual hole, like someone had cut a piece out of the world itself. Through the hole, he could see stars and darkness, even though it was the middle of the day. A ship came through the hole. It was huge, maybe the size of a football stadium, and it looked like it was made of crystal and metal twisted together. The ship moved slowly and carefully, like it was trying not to scare him. As it came closer to the lake, Jake could see that parts of the hull were transparent, showing the inside, and the inside was full of the strangest things he had ever seen. The ship settled onto the lake's surface, but somehow stayed floating on top of the water. Jake watched as a section of the hull became completely clear, like a window. Inside, he could see creatures that looked like they came from a science fiction movie. One of them was tall and thin, with 4 arms and eyes like an insect. Another looked like a dolphin that could somehow float in the air. A third was made of what looked like living rock. The tall one with 4 arms approached the clear section of the hull. Jake could see it looking at him, studying him like he was an interesting puzzle. Then something amazing happened. The creature's voice appeared inside Jake's head, as clear as if someone was standing right next to him. "Greetings, human," the voice said. "I am Commander Zethkara of the Valyrian Defense Fleet. We come in peace and we desperately need your help." Jake set down his fishing rod and looked at the alien commander. He had seen a lot of strange things in his military career, but this was definitely a first. "Well," he said out loud, "that's not something you hear every day." "What kind of help are you talking about?" "The kind that your species understands better than any other," Zethkara replied. "We need to learn how to fight a war." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Hold on there, buddy. I can see you've got a spaceship that's bigger than my entire town. I'm pretty sure you could turn this whole planet into a parking lot if you wanted to. What could I possibly teach you about fighting?" The floating dolphin-like creature moved closer to the window. "I am Captain Nelandra." Her voice joined Zethkara in his mind. "We have been studying your species for several months. We have watched your history, your conflicts, your methods of warfare. You do not just fight to survive, you fight to win. That is something we have never learned to do." Jake leaned back in his boat and looked at the 2 aliens. "You're talking about a real war, aren't you? Not some disagreement over trade routes, or who gets to mine what asteroid." "An enemy that consumes entire worlds," Zethkara confirmed. "They are called the Hive. They turn our own people against us. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can create new ones, and they grow stronger. With each victory, we have lost more ships in the past week than we lost in the previous 100 years combined." Jake was quiet for a moment. He watched the ripples his boat made on the calm water. "How many people are we talking about saving here?" "Billions," Nelandra said softly. "Perhaps trillions across dozens of worlds. 7 different species working together, and we are all losing." Jake nodded slowly. He had hoped his fighting days were over, but it seemed like the universe had other plans. "All right, I'll bite. But you need to understand something first. If you want to learn how humans fight wars, you're going to learn some things that might not sit well with your peaceful alliance." "What do you mean?" asked Zethkara. "I mean that humans don't fight fair. We don't follow rules when our survival is on the line. We use every dirty trick, every psychological advantage, every weakness we can find. We fight to win, not to prove how honorable we are." The 2 aliens exchanged what Jake assumed was a meaningful look. "That is exactly what we need," Nelandra said. "Our honorable methods are getting us killed." Jake stood up in his boat and looked at the massive ship. "Okay, but I'm not doing this alone. If you want to learn how humans fight, you're going to need more than just one retired Marine. You're going to need specialists." "We can bring anyone you require," Zethkara said quickly. "Our transporters can reach anywhere on your world in minutes," Jake grinned. "Then let's make some calls." 2 hours later, Jake found himself inside the alien ship, surrounded by the most incredible technology he had ever seen. The walls seemed to be alive, pulsing with soft light. The air tasted different, cleaner somehow. And the aliens themselves were even more amazing up close. Besides Zethkara and Nelandra, there were several other species represented. The rock-like beings called themselves the Granite People, and they spoke in slow, rumbling voices that sounded like distant thunder. The crystal creatures were called Nexari, and they communicated through musical tones that somehow translated into words in his mind. The gas-like beings were ethereals, and they moved through the ship's systems like living wind. "Your friends will be here soon," Zathkara said, gesturing toward a large viewing screen that showed the lake outside. "Our sensors indicate 5 aircraft approaching from different directions," Jake nodded. He had called in some favors, contacted some old friends. People he had served with, people he trusted. If they were going to teach an alien alliance how to fight a war, they would need the best. The first to arrive was Lisa Chun, his old squad mate from his days in Afghanistan. She landed her small plane on the lake like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lisa had been a pilot in the Air Force before joining the Marines, and she could fly anything with wings. Next came Carlos Rodriguez, driving up in his beat-up truck. Carlos had been their explosives expert, a guy who could make a bomb out of anything. He looked at the alien ship and whistled low. "Jake, when you said you needed help with something unusual, I thought you meant fixing your roof." Dr. Amy Foster arrived by helicopter, her medical training having led her into military psychology. She studied the aliens with professional interest. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Multiple species working together. The psychological dynamics must be incredible." Commander Ben Walsh came by government car, his Navy uniform crisp despite the long drive. He had been Jake's superior officer in their last mission together, a tactical genius who could see 3 moves ahead in any battle. Last to arrive was Maria Santos, who simply appeared at the lake's edge as if she had been there all along. That was Maria's way. She had been their intelligence officer, the one who could find information about anyone or anything. As the 6 humans gathered on the alien ship, Jake looked around at his old team. They had been through hell together, fought in wars that most people would never hear about, saved lives that would never know their names. Now they were about to do it again, but on a scale none of them had ever imagined. "All right, everyone," Jake said. "Meet our new allies. We've got a galaxy to save." Dr. Foster was the first to speak. "What exactly are we dealing with? What kind of enemy are we fighting?" Zathkara activated a holographic display that showed the High Fleet. The bioships look like nightmares made real, all spines and organic weapons and hungry tendrils. "They consume everything in their path," he explained. "They adapt to our weapons, turn our own people against us, and grow stronger. With each victory..." Lisa studied the ships with a pilot's eye. "They're organic. That means they have weaknesses that mechanical ships don't have. They need food, they can get sick, they can be poisoned." Carlos grinned. "And if they're alive, they can feel pain. Pain makes things stupid. More importantly," Ben added, "they're thinking like predators. They're used to their prey running away. What happens when the prey turns around and attacks?" Maria was already taking notes. "We need intelligence. Movement patterns, communication methods, supply lines, every predator has weaknesses." Amy nodded. "And we need to understand their psychology. Fear, anger, confusion. These are weapons just as powerful as any bomb." Jake looked at his team, then at the assembled aliens. "You wanted to learn how humans fight wars. Well, here's your first lesson. We don't just fight the enemy's ships. We fight their minds, their supply lines, their morale, their assumptions about how a war should be fought." "This is madness," whispered one of the Nexari. "You are talking about fighting an enemy that has consumed 17 worlds." "No," Jake replied. "We're talking about teaching them what happens when they try to consume a world defended by someone who knows how to fight back." The hole in the sky closed behind them as the alien ship prepared to leave Earth's atmosphere. Jake looked out at his peaceful lake one last time. He had found his quiet retirement, but the universe had other plans. Time to go to war. 3 days later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Valyrian flagship, looking at the biggest war room he had ever seen. The space was filled with holographic displays showing star maps, ship positions, and battle plans. Alien officers from 7 Different species worked at stations that looked like they belonged in a dream. Around him, his 5 human teammates were getting their first real look at how the Alliance fought their wars. The expressions on their faces told Jake everything. He needed to know. They were not impressed. "Okay, first question," Jake said, pointing at the main tactical display. "Why are you fighting them where they want to fight?" Commander Zethkara's mandibles clicked in confusion. "I do not understand your question, Jake Morrison. We fight them where they appear. When they attack our worlds, we defend those worlds." "That's your first mistake," Lisa said, her pilot instincts kicking in. "You're playing defense." "They choose when and where to engage, which means they're always prepared and you're always reacting. You're letting them control the entire war." Carlos leaned forward, studying the holographic images of the Hive bioships. "These things are grown, not built, right? Like giant space bugs?" "That is correct," replied Captain Nalandra. "They are biological constructs, created from organic materials, that the Hive harvests from consumed worlds." "Then that's where we hit them," Amy said, her psychology training making connections the aliens had missed. "Not in space where they're strongest, but at their supply lines. We make them hungry." The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions that Jake was learning to read. Confusion mixed with doubt. These beings had been fighting defensive wars for so long that the idea of going on the attack seemed foreign to them. "But their supply lines are protected by their strongest forces," protested Captain Vexai, a Granite People officer whose rock-like body made him look like a living mountain. "To attack their rear positions would be suicide." Then Walsh smiled. And Jake recognized that expression. It was the same smile Ben had worn before their most successful missions back on Earth. "Exactly, you've been thinking like prey animals. Run away from the predator, hide in your burrow, defend your home. But humans are predators too. We don't run from a fight. We take the fight to the enemy's home." "This is madness," sang one of the Nexari in her musical voice. "Their fleet is 12 times our size. We cannot possibly attack their main forces." "Who said anything about attacking their main forces?" Maria asked, her intelligence officer mind already working on the problem. "We're not going to fight their entire fleet at once. We're going to split them up, confuse them, make them chase us all over the galaxy while we pick them apart piece by piece." Jake nodded approvingly. "Guerrilla warfare. Hit-and-run tactics. Never fight fair when you can fight smart. The goal isn't to destroy their entire fleet in one big battle. The goal is to make them so busy chasing us that they can't focus on consuming more worlds. But how do we make them chase us?" asked Lieutenant Vorthok, his reptilian tail twitching with nervous energy. "They have been the hunters for so long. What would make them become the hunted?" The 6 humans exchanged looks and grinned. Jake had seen that expression on his team's faces before, usually right before they did something that would give their commanding officers nightmares. "Simple," Jake said. "We do something they've never seen before. We make them angry." Dr. Foster stepped forward, her understanding of psychology making her the perfect person to explain. "Every predator has instincts. The Hive has been successful because they're used to their prey running away. Their entire strategy is based on that assumption. But what happens when the prey turns around and fights back? When it hurts them instead of just trying to escape? They get confused," Carlos added. "And confused enemies make mistakes, big mistakes." "More than that," Lisa said, studying the tactical displays. "Look at how they move. Perfect formations, coordinated attacks, everything planned and controlled. That's the behavior of a species that's never had to adapt to an enemy that fights back effectively." Ben was already sketching out ideas on a portable tablet. "We need to change their entire understanding of how this war works. Instead of defending fixed positions, we become a mobile threat. Instead of trying to save every world, we make them afraid to land on any world." "But our responsibility is to protect the Alliance worlds," Zethkara protested. "We cannot simply abandon them to focus on offensive operations." "You're not abandoning them," Jake explained. "You're changing the rules of engagement. Right now, The hive knows exactly what you're going to do. They attack, you defend, they overwhelm you with numbers. It's predictable. But if you start attacking their supply lines, their feeding grounds, their safe zones, they'll have to split their forces to defend themselves. Maria had been quiet, taking notes and studying the intelligence reports. I need more information about their communication patterns, their hierarchy, their decision-making process. Every enemy has a command structure, and every command structure has weak points. What kind of weak points? Asked Captain Nelendra. The kind that make them do stupid things when you push the right buttons, Maria replied. Fear, anger, pride, overconfidence. These are weapons just as powerful as any energy cannon. Amy nodded. Psychological warfare. We don't just fight their ships. We fight their minds. We make them question their own superiority, their own tactics, their own assumptions about how wars should be fought. The alien officers were silent for a long moment. Jake could see them struggling with concepts that were completely foreign to their way of thinking. The alliance had been built on cooperation, understanding, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. The idea of deliberately trying to anger and confuse an enemy was not something they were comfortable with. This goes against everything we believe in, said one of the ethereal officers, his gaseous form flickering with distress. We are supposed to be better than our enemies, not more vicious. And how's that working out for you? Carlos asked bluntly. You're losing, your people are dying. Your worlds are being consumed. Sometimes being better means being willing to do whatever it takes to protect the innocent. Jake stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Look, I understand this is hard. You've built your entire civilization on the idea that there's always a peaceful solution to every problem. But the hive isn't interested in peace. They're interested in consumption. They don't want to negotiate or compromise. They want to eat everything you've ever built. So what do you suggest? Zethkara asked quietly. We teach them that eating Alliance worlds gives them indigestion, Lisa said with a grin. Ben had finished his preliminary tactical analysis. Here's what I'm thinking. We divide our forces into small, fast-moving groups. Each group targets a different aspect of their operation. Supply lines, communication relays, isolated feeding operations. We hit them everywhere at once, then disappear before they can respond. Like a swarm of insects, Amy added. Individually weak, but collectively devastating. And just when they think they've figured out our pattern, we change it. Carlos was already thinking about the technical aspects. We'll need to modify your weapons, make them more effective against biological targets. And we'll need to develop new delivery systems, things they've never seen before. What about their ability to adapt? Asked Vorthok. Every weapon we have used, they have developed defenses against. That's because you've been giving them time to adapt, Maria explained. You engage them in long battles, giving their collective consciousness time to analyze and counter your tactics. But if you hit them hard and fast, then disappear before they can respond, they don't have time to adapt. Jake looked around the room at the assembled officers. This is going to require a complete change in how you think about warfare. No more honor guards, no more fair fights, no more giving the enemy time to prepare. We're going to fight dirty, and we're going to fight smart. And if we do this, Zethkara said slowly, what happens to us? What do we become? Jake was quiet. For a moment, thinking about all the wars he had fought, all the compromises he had made in the name of protecting the innocent. You become whatever you need to become to save your people. And you hope that when the war is over, you can find your way back to who you used to be. The alien officers looked at each other, then at the humans who had come to help them. It was a hard choice, but it was not really a choice at all. They could change or they could die. Very well, Zethkara said finally. Teach us how to fight like humans, Jake smiled grimly. Lesson 1. The enemy's weakness is that they think they're unbeatable. We're going to prove them wrong. The first human-planned operation was simple in a way that made the alien commanders nervous. Instead of defending the next world in the hive's path, they were going to abandon it completely. But Jake and his team had spent 2 days on the planet. Nethmer and they had not been sitting around doing nothing. "This feels wrong," Commander Zethkara said as he watched the evacuation ships leave the agricultural world below. "We are abandoning 3 million people to save them. How does that make sense?" "Because sometimes you have to give up ground to win the war," Jake replied, checking his equipment one last time. "The people are safe. The hive is about to learn that not every meal comes without a price." The planet Nethmer was perfect for their plan. It was covered in farms and food processing plants, exactly the kind of rich organic material the hive loved to consume. The bioships would spread out across the surface to feed, making them vulnerable. That was when the humans would spring their trap. Carlos had spent the last 2 days setting up his surprises, unlike the Alliance's usual approach of fighting. In space, he had prepared the planet itself as a weapon. Hidden beneath the soil of every major farm were devices that looked harmless but were anything but. "Remember," Amy said over the communication system, "this isn't just about destroying their ships. It's about sending a message. We want them angry, confused, and ready to make mistakes." The hive fleet arrived exactly as predicted. 200 bioships moving in their usual perfect formation. They swept around the planet, scanning for defensive positions, weapons platforms, anything that might threaten them. They found nothing. "All ships begin consumption protocols," came the message that Maria had learned to translate from hive communications. The bioships spread out across Nethmer's surface like a plague of locusts, extending their feeding tendrils deep into the soil. Jake watched from the bridge of a hidden observation ship, counting down the minutes. "Wait for it," he said quietly. "Let them get comfortable. Let them think this is just another easy meal." The hive ships had been feeding for 30 minutes. When Carlos pressed the button across the planet's surface, thousands of hidden devices activated at once. But these were not ordinary explosives. Carlos had created them using a combination of human knowledge and alien technology. The charges released a cloud of chemicals that were specifically designed to be toxic to biological organisms like the hive ships. The effect was immediate and terrible. The feeding tendrils of the bioships began to twist and writhe like snakes in pain. Their hulls, which had always been smooth and perfect, started developing ugly wounds and sores. Black liquid poured from cracks that appeared along their sides. "Phase 2, Lisa announced, leading a squadron of modified Alliance fighters in a strafing run against the poisoned bioships, but the fighters were not trying to destroy the hive ships. Instead, they were equipped with Maria's psychological warfare tools. As they flew over the writhing bioships, they broadcast recordings across all frequencies. The sounds of the dying bioships, amplified and repeated, filled the communication channels that the hive used to coordinate their attacks. The strategy worked exactly as the humans had planned. The hive ships, hearing the screams of their poisoned companions, began to panic. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, they retreated from a world they had started to consume, but the humans were not done with them yet. "Now comes the fun part," Ben said from the command center they had established on a nearby asteroid. "Angry enemies chase shadows. Let's give them some shadows to chase." The Alliance fleet, following Ben's tactical plan, split into 7 different groups. Each group headed in a different direction, making sure the hive could track them on their sensors. To the bioships, it looked like the Alliance forces were scattering in panic. "They're taking the bait," Amy reported, watching the hive fleet's movements on her displays. "The bioships are splitting up to pursue our groups. Their coordination is breaking down." "Perfect," Jake said. "Angry enemies make mistakes, and we're going to make sure they have plenty to be angry about." Over the next several weeks, the human-trained Alliance forces fought a completely different kind of war. They no longer tried to defend fixed positions or engage in fair fights. Instead, they struck like lightning and disappeared like ghosts. Group Alpha, led by Lisa, specialized in hit-and-run attacks on hive supply convoys. Her pilots would appear out of nowhere, destroy a few bioships, and vanish before the main hive force could respond. Each attack was carefully planned to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. Group Beta, following Carlos's explosive expertise focused on sabotaging hive feeding operations. They would sneak onto worlds where the bioships were consuming resources and plant devices that turned the food into poison. The hive ships would arrive expecting an easy meal and instead find death waiting for them. Group Gamma used Amy's psychological warfare techniques. They would broadcast fake communications, create false sensor readings, and generally make the hive think there were Alliance forces everywhere at once. The bioships began chasing phantom enemies across empty space. Group Delta followed Ben's strategic planning, attacking hive communication relays and coordination centers. Without their ability to share information instantly, the bioships started making independent decisions that did not always work together. Groups Epsilon, Zeta, and Eta rotated between different tactics, keeping the hive guessing about what would happen next. Sometimes they would attack aggressively, sometimes they would retreat and lead the bioships into traps, sometimes they would simply disappear for days before striking somewhere. Completely unexpected, the effect on the hive was exactly what the humans had hoped for. The bioships, used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer numbers and superior adaptation, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to be overwhelmed. Every time they concentrated their forces to crush one Alliance group, 3 other groups would attack somewhere else. "Sir," Lieutenant Vorthak reported, his voice filled with something that had been missing for months, "we have destroyed more hive ships in the past 3 weeks than in the previous 3 months combined. Their fleet is scattered across 12 different star systems, and they are showing signs of confusion and poor coordination." Commander Zethkara looked at the tactical displays with amazement. The red dots that represented hive ships were no longer grouped together in overwhelming formations. Instead, they were spread across the galaxy in small, isolated groups that could be picked off one by one. "How is this possible?" he asked. "We have the same ships we had before. The same weapons, the same crews. What has changed?" "Everything," Jake replied. 3 weeks ago you were thinking like prey. You were trying to survive the fight. Now you're thinking like hunters. You're trying to win the war. And there's a big difference between those two things. Maria looked up from her intelligence reports. The hive is adapting, but not in the way they usually do. Instead of becoming stronger, they're becoming more desperate. They're making mistakes they've never made before. "What kind of mistakes?" asked Captain Nelindra. "They're splitting their forces too much, trying to chase all our groups at once. They're wasting resources on attacks that have no strategic value. Most importantly, they're starting to fight each other when their independent groups disagree about tactics." Amy nodded. "Fear and anger are powerful emotions. The Hive Collective is experiencing them for the first time, and they don't know how to handle it. Their perfect coordination is breaking down." Carlos grinned as he studied the latest battle reports. "And the best part is, every time they try to adapt to one of our tactics, we switch to something completely different. They can't keep up." Ben was already planning the next phase of operations. "We've got them scattered and confused. Now we need to keep the pressure on while they're weak. But we also need to start thinking about the endgame." "What do you mean?" asked Zethkara. "We can't run this kind of campaign forever," Ben explained. "Our crews are getting tired, our ships need repairs, and eventually the Hive will adapt to our new tactics just like they adapted to your old ones. We need to find a way to finish this war while we still have the advantage." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Any ideas on how to do that?" Amy was studying the psychological profiles she had built of the Hive Collective. "Actually, yes, I think I know their weakness. And if I'm right, we might be able to end this war with one decisive strike." The room fell silent as everyone waited for her to continue. "The Hive is a collective consciousness, but that also means it's vulnerable to collective trauma. We've been hurting them, confusing them, making them angry. What if we could do something? That would shock their entire collective so badly that they couldn't function at all." "What kind of shock?" Maria asked. Amy smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "The kind that comes from discovering that you're not the apex predator you thought you were." The war had been raging for 6 months when Dr. Amy Foster made the discovery that would change everything. She was in her makeshift laboratory on the asteroid base, studying pieces of destroyed Hive bioships when she noticed something that made her call an emergency meeting. "They're not just a collective consciousness," she announced to the assembled War Council. "They're a hive mind with a central control node. All their adaptation, all their coordination, all their intelligence comes from a single source." Jake looked up from the tactical reports he had been reading. "You mean like a queen bee?" "More like the brain of a giant organism," Amy replied. "Every bioship we've captured has neural pathways that connect back to something else. Something bigger. If we could find that central brain and destroy it, the rest of the hive would lose their ability to think and coordinate." Maria leaned forward, her intelligence training immediately seeing the possibilities. "I've been tracking their communication patterns for months. There is definitely a central hub that all the other ships report to. It stays hidden, protected by their strongest forces, but I think I know where it is." The location was a nightmare scenario. The hive's central brain was hidden in a nebula that interfered with most sensors and communication systems. It was surrounded by nearly half of their remaining fleet, all the strongest and most dangerous bioships they had left. A direct attack would be suicide. "So we don't make a direct attack," Ven said, studying the star charts. "We make them bring it to us." "How?" asked Commander Zethkara. Jake grinned, and everyone in the room recognized that expression by now. It was the look he got when he was about to suggest something completely insane that might actually work. "We make them think we're planning one final, desperate attack on their most important conquest. Something so valuable that they'll bring their central brain forward to coordinate the defense personally." The plan was audacious even by human standards. Using every ship in the Alliance fleet, they would appear to launch an all-out assault on the Hive's most recently conquered world. The planet Keth Prime had been the capital of a major trade empire before the Hive consumed it. If the Alliance looked like they were trying to retake it, the Hive would assume it was their last desperate attempt to save something important. "This is completely insane," muttered Captain Vexhigh, his rocky features showing doubt. "We're betting everything on the assumption that we can trick an intelligence that has consumed dozens of worlds." "That's where you're wrong," Lisa said as she checked her fighters' weapon systems. "We're not trying to trick them. We're trying to make them react the way they always react. Overwhelming force, perfect coordination, bringing everything they have to crush us completely." Carlos was busy preparing his largest surprise yet. Instead of the small, hidden bombs he had been using, he was building something that would require every Alliance ship to work together. "This is either going to be the most brilliant plan in military history or the most spectacular failure," he said as he worked. "Both, probably," Maria replied. "But that's what makes it perfect. The Hive expects us to be logical and predictable. This plan is neither." The battle was joined in the space around Keth Prime 3 days later. The Alliance fleet, fighting with everything they had learned from the humans, held their ground against overwhelming odds. But this time they were not trying to win. They were trying to survive long enough for the real plan to work. "There!" Lisa shouted from her fighter as she spotted the massive bioship emerging from the nebula. "The central brain is moving forward to coordinate the attack." The creature was enormous, easily 10 times the size of any bioship they had seen before. It looked like a giant brain covered in armor and weapons, with neural tendrils that reached out to connect with the other hive ships. As soon as it arrived, the enemy coordination improved dramatically. "Now we spring the trap," Jake announced, hidden among the asteroids around Keth Prime. Carlos had positioned his masterpiece. It was not designed to destroy the central brain, but to do something much more clever. The device sent out an electromagnetic pulse that was specifically tuned to disrupt biological neural networks. The effect was immediate and devastating. The giant brain ship convulsed as if it had been struck by lightning. Its neural connections to the rest of the fleet were severed, leaving hundreds of bioships suddenly cut off from their controlling intelligence. "Phase 2, Amy called out. activating her psychological warfare system. Instead of the usual broadcasts, this time she transmitted something completely different. Using the neural disruption device, she sent false signals directly into the brain ships. Damaged nervous system. Signals that told it the other bioships were enemies. Signals that made it attack its own fleet. The results were chaos. The central brain, confused and in pain, began firing on the nearest bioships. The bioships, cut off from their controlling intelligence, responded by firing back. Within minutes, the perfectly coordinated Hive fleet had turned into a confused mass of ships attacking each other. "Now we finish this," Ben announced, leading the final assault. The Alliance forces, no longer facing a coordinated enemy, systematically destroyed the confused bioships. The central brain, its neural networks fried by Carlos's device and its connection to the fleet destroyed, was helpless to stop them. Jake watched from the bridge of the flagship as the last bioship exploded. The central brain hung in space like a dying whale, its lights flickering and fading. "Target the brain ship," he ordered. And this. The combined firepower of the Alliance fleet struck the massive creature. It convulsed once, twice, then went dark and still. Across the galaxy, every remaining Hive ship suddenly stopped moving as their central intelligence died. The war was over. Commander Zethkara found himself standing beside Jake on the bridge, looking out at the debris field that had once been an unstoppable force. "How?" he asked quietly. "How did 6 humans teach an entire galactic alliance to fight a war we were losing?" Jake smiled and put his hand on the alien commander's shoulder. "Easy. We taught you the most important lesson humans have ever learned. Sometimes the best way to survive is to make sure the other guy doesn't." In the days that followed, as the Alliance began the long process of rebuilding, the story of the 6 humans who had turned the tide spread across the galaxy. Species that had been on the brink of extinction now spoke of their human allies with wonder and gratitude. Lisa had taught them that mobility was more important than armor. Carlos had shown them that the right explosion at the right time could change everything. Amy had demonstrated that the mind was the most powerful weapon of all. Ben had proven that strategy was worth more than numbers. Maria had revealed that information was the key to victory, and Jake had shown them all that sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, the answer is not to give up but to change the rules of the game. The Alliance of Peaceful Worlds had learned that sometimes peace had to be fought for. They had learned that being civilized did not mean being weak. Most importantly, they had learned that when your survival is on the line, there is no such thing as fighting dirty. Only fighting smart. Captain Nalandra approached Jake as he prepared to return to Earth. "What will you do now?" she asked. "You have saved billions of lives. You are heroes across the galaxy." Jake looked out at the stars and thought about his quiet lake in Montana. "I think I'm going to go fishing," he said. "But if you ever need us again, you know where to find us." The humans had kept their promise. They had taught the galaxy how to fight. And, in doing so, they had earned their place among the stars as the species that turned warfare into an art form and were willing to share that art with anyone brave. Enough to learn. As the Alliance fleet dispersed to begin the work of rebuilding their worlds, they carried with them a new understanding. They were no longer just the Alliance of Peaceful Worlds. They were survivors. They were warriors. They were the inheritors of human military wisdom, and they would never be prey again. Years later, when other threats emerged from the dark spaces between stars, the galaxy was ready. The humans had taught them well. Peace was worth fighting for. And there was no enemy too strong to defeat if you were willing to think like a predator instead of prey. The 6 humans returned to Earth as quietly as they had left, their names known only to those who had fought beside them. But their legacy lived on in every Alliance fleet, in every defensive strategy, in every tactical manual that bore the simple inscription, "Fight smart, fight dirty, fight to win." The galaxy was safe, and it would stay that way.